I knew the envelope was going to irritate me before I even opened it. There's a certain way my sister's handwriting curves when she wants to sound friendly but still superior. Like she's pretending to be warm for the sake of etiquette. Miss Brittany Evans, it said in metallic cursive, on the front of a cream-colored envelope that probably cost more than my monthly groceries. She always did like to put on a show. Inside was a wedding-themed card, soft pink and gold, with an RSVP tucked inside and a note scribbled at the bottom. Hope you can help with the paperwork and coordination stuff. You're so good at organizing. That was the first sting. Not, can't wait to see you, or it wouldn't be the same without you. Just an assumption that I'd be there in the background with my head down and my sleeves rolled up like always. That's how it's always been. I'm Brittany, the younger one, the quiet one, the helper. Nicole, my older sister, has always been the center of attention. The golden child. She was the one with the sparkly prom dress and the crown to match. The one whose high school graduation had its own catering and photographer. The one whose heartbreaks were family events. My wins? They were always nice. Oh, Brittany got a job? Nice. Oh, Brittany moved to a new city? That's nice. Even when I made law review, no one asked me what that meant. I learned to stop telling them anything at all dots, so no, I wasn't surprised the wedding invitation came with a side of condescension. Still, I told myself maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe it wasn't as loaded as it felt. Maybe she just needed help and didn't know how to ask it kindly. I told myself all these things, lies we tell ourselves to keep the peace, and checked yes on the RSVP. The wedding was set in a sprawling countryside estate 2 hours from where I lived. Nicole had rented out the entire venue for the weekend. When I arrived, the valet actually asked me which vendor I was with. I had to explain twice that I was the bride's sister. He nodded sheepishly and waved me in, but I could feel his surprise. I was dressed plainly in a navy blue dress, hair pulled back, minimal makeup. It wasn't that I didn't have fancier clothes. I just didn't feel like performing. Inside, everything was manicured. Fairy lights wrapped around wooden beams. Long candlelit tables lined the reception hall. Guests fluttered around with champagne and laughter. I stood near the doorway for a moment, adjusting to the noise and opulence. Then I saw Nicole. She was in white, not her wedding dress yet, but something lacy and dramatic. Her eyes lit up when she saw me, but not in the way I'd hoped. More like she was checking to make sure the props were in place. You made it. She beamed, then leaned in with a practiced hug that didn't quite touch either of our chests. You'll be sitting at the table near the back, okay? Closer to the kitchen. That way, if anyone needs help with seating or lost name tags or whatever. I smiled, but it was the kind of smile you learn to fake in courtrooms. Calm. Even measured. I nodded. Of course. Dinner came the night before the wedding, a formal gathering for the immediate family. Bridal party and VIP guests. Nicole insisted it would be intimate, but that turned out to mean 50 people, catered by a private chef with printed menus and live music. I sat at one of the long tables near Nicole's end. Not beside her, of course. That space was reserved for her fiance, Kali, a sweet enough guy who I'd barely had 2 conversations with, and her bridesmaids, all in coordinated pastel. Dresses that matched the decor. When the food was served, conversation flowed easily around me. I stayed quiet, sipping my wine. I've always preferred to observe before speaking, a habit that served me well in my line of work. And people tend to say more when they think you're not listening. At one point, someone asked Nicole if everything was on track for the ceremony. Almost, she said with a theatrical sigh. But thank God for Brittany. Honestly, she's been so helpful. You know how good she is with papers and organizing stuff. She's always been kind of admin-minded. Then she laughed. A light, careless laugh that bounced around the room. I mean, someone's got to do the behind-the-scenes stuff, right? She's like our little office ninja. The table chuckled. Even Kali grinned, awkwardly, but he didn't say anything. I felt it in my stomach, the twist of humiliation and fury, the kind that only family can trigger. It was a small comment, maybe even intended as a compliment. But everyone at that table heard the subtext. Brittany isn't important. She's not someone you ask about. She's not someone you admire. She's just someone you assign things to. Someone you overlook. I didn't respond. Not yet. There's an art to silence. It can be louder than any outburst, heavier than any insult. I let the moment pass. I let her think she'd gotten away with it again. I watched the smug curl of her lips, the sparkle in her eye. And I filed it all away because I knew something she didn't. She didn't know who I was. Not really. She didn't know what I'd done in the years since I moved out. She didn't know how hard I worked, what walls I climbed, or what courtroom doors had opened to me. She never asked. Because in her mind, I'd always be the one who made copies and fetched things. That was my role. The helper, the background. And she needed me to stay there to make herself feel bigger. What she didn't realize was that I stopped playing that role years ago. And tomorrow, when her fiance asked me a simple question, one that would shatter her illusion, the entire room would find out, I wouldn't yell. I wouldn't seek revenge. I'd just tell the truth, and that would be enough. I wish I could tell you that Nicole and I were ever close, that we were the kind of sisters who stayed up late whispering secrets, who borrowed each other's clothes, who knew the names of each other's childhood crushes. But we weren't. I was 5 when I realized that Nicole didn't see me as her sister. Not really. I was her audience. Her shadow. Her contrast dot. She was loud, charismatic, beautiful in the way that made strangers look twice. She knew how to pose for pictures by the time she was 10. She cried strategically. She won every school vote, every teacher's approval, every grandparent's favor, and me, I was quiet, bookish. I followed rules because I hated disappointing people, not because I wanted praise. I blended in easily. People forgot my name at church, even though they knew Nicole's birthday by heart. Growing up in her orbit meant being treated like a supporting character in a show that was never yours. Our parents, bless their obliviousness, were always comparing. Not outright, they were too polite for that, but there were always these little phrases. Nicole's just so naturally talented, you know? Brittany's the responsible one. Nicole has that spark. She was born to lead. Brittany is so reliable, such a great helper. I became addicted to checking boxes because it was the only way I could feel seen. Straight A's, extracurriculars, volunteering. I did everything right, quietly, efficiently. And still Nicole got the bigger cake, the louder applause, the longer hugs. When we were teens, the gap between us only grew. She dated football. Captains. I stayed home reading case law for fun. She threw tantrums that ended with shopping trips. I folded my hurt into notebooks and turned it into fuel. I got into college on scholarship. She got a new car for her birthday. Even then, I didn't hate her. I envied her, yes. I resented the way she could dismiss me with a sigh or a giggle. But mostly, I pitied her because I could see something no one else in the family could. Nicole's entire identity depended on being worshipped. She needed people to admire her, to envy her, to orbit around her. Without that attention, she deflated. Meanwhile, I kept my head down. I earned a degree in criminal justice, then another in law. I worked brutal hours. I clerked for judges who, terrified in turns into tears. I learned to write, to argue, to listen with lethal precision. I became everything Nicole never imagined I could be, because she never looked closely enough to realize I was more than just her quiet little sister. When I graduated from law school, I invited our parents. They didn't come. Nicole had a surprise modeling shoot that week, and apparently it wouldn't be fair to attend mine without going to hers. I watched other students take photos with their families, flowers in hand, proud tears all around. I stood alone by the steps of the courthouse that day and made a promise to myself. I would never again wait for applause from people who refused to see me. Years passed. I became a prosecutor, then a federal clerk. I earned my appointment as judge last year, one of the youngest in my district, and one of only 3 women. It was the proudest moment of my life. I didn't tell Nicole. I didn't even tell my parents. I didn't need their approval anymore. I had my own dots, so when Nicole sent that wedding invitation with her usual performative flair, I knew what I was walking into. She didn't want a sister there. She wanted the same quiet Brittany who used to pin up her curls and keep her secrets and hand her tissues after every melodrama. She wanted the shadow, but I'm not a shadow anymore. And soon she'd realize just how brightly I could stand on my own without ever raising my voice. The engagement dinner was held at a high-end Italian restaurant Nicole had rented out entirely for the occasion because, of course, nothing about her life could ever be modest. She arrived in a tight white dress that sparkled obnoxiously. Under the dim chandeliers, holding onto her fiance's arm like he was a prop in one of her Instagram reels. The room was packed. Family, friends, acquaintances she probably hadn't spoken to in years, but invited just to show them she was winning. There was champagne, string quartet, a table just for gifts, and me seated at the far end near the kitchen doors. I didn't mind the distance. I hadn't come to be seen. I'd come because my parents insisted. Because saying no would cause more drama than showing up and enduring a few hours of thin smiles and shallow conversation. I wore a navy dress, clean and simple. No designer label, no effort to stand out. I greeted everyone politely, sipped my water, and waited for dinner to end. But Nicole couldn't resist. It started harmlessly. She stood to thank everyone for coming, a speech rehearsed like a monologue. She thanked her fiancé, thanked her parents for believing in her dreams, even thanked the staff for the impeccable service. Then her eyes flicked to me. I knew that look. It was the same look she gave me at 13, right before she told our cousins I still slept with a nightlight. And of course, she said, beaming, "A huge thank you to my baby sister Brittany for helping me with all the paperwork stuff. You know, she's great with forms. Always has been. I don't know how you do it, honestly. I'd die if I had to stare at boring files all day." There were a few chuckles. Not laughter. The kind of weak, unsure sound people make when they're not sure if it's okay to laugh. I looked around, smiled tightly. A few guests avoided my eyes. Someone whispered, "She's always been the practical one, huh?" Nicole sat down like she had. Just dropped a punchline that would echo in the family group chat for weeks. I didn't respond, but I felt my fingers twitch under the table, like they were itching to write a verdict. The dinner continued, and so did Nicole. Throughout the night, she sprinkled in these little barbs disguised as affection. Brittany's so organized, you should see her Excel sheets. If I ever need someone to alphabetize my emails, I know who to call. She's like admin, but with a law degree, right? I said nothing. I smiled. I even helped pass a dish or two. But inside, I was watching not her, but her fiancé. I noticed how he stopped laughing after the third comment. How he glanced at me curiously like something didn't add up. One point, he leaned toward me while Nicole was busy posing for selfies and said, "Sorry, but what exactly do you do, Brittany?" It was the kind of question that usually led to a conversation, a way to break the ice. But I saw Nicole watching, me from across the table, one eyebrow raised like she was daring me to ruin her moment. So I smiled, and I said one word, "Judge." The room didn't go silent immediately. It was like a ripple, a slow hush that spread from our end of the table outward. Someone dropped a fork. My father looked up from his wine. Nicole blinked. Her fiancé froze. Because he recognized my name. Because he had been in my courtroom, or maybe his law firm had. Because suddenly, I wasn't the quiet sister anymore. I was a woman with power, with presence, with a seat at a table that mattered. Not the dinner table, but the bench. Nicole opened her mouth, but nothing came out. For once, the girl who always had something clever to say was speechless, and I just kept smiling. After I said it, Judge, the atmosphere didn't recover. You could feel it in the way the string quartet faltered mid-note, then quietly transitioned to a softer melody, like even the music was embarrassed. Nicole laughed, but it wasn't her usual triumphant cackle. It was high-pitched, brittle, the sound of glass cracking under pressure. "Oh, come on, Brittany," she said, waving a manicured hand. "You're not actually a judge. Right, you mean like you do court paperwork or something?" I tilted my head and looked at her. I preside over federal civil litigation cases, mostly intellectual property, some white-collar crime. The words didn't need to be loud. They landed like anvils. Someone dropped their wine glass. Her fiancé was staring at me like I'd just unzipped a mask and revealed a stranger beneath. My mother had gone pale. My father was shifting uncomfortably in his chair, clearly reviewing every joke he'd ever. made about me just being good with a stapler. Nicole scoffed, eyes darting around for support. Well, that's not what you said last Christmas. You said you handled documents. I shrugged. Court documents, yes. There it was. The flash of real panic in her eyes. The kind that comes when you realize the character you've built for someone, the quiet helper, the invisible sister, is no longer playing the part. And worse, never was. She leaned forward, voice dripping with disdain. Okay, but you're still the one who brings coffee to meetings, right? You're not important. I didn't blink. I sentenced people to prison. Nicole. The room gasped. Literal gasps. One of our uncles nearly choked on a meatball. The waiter who had just poured wine into Nicole's glass paused, clearly wondering if he should retreat. Nicole's fiance leaned back in his chair and whispered something under his breath. He wasn't looking at her anymore. Only at me. I wasn't trying to humiliate her. I wasn't trying to claim the spotlight. But for years I had been quiet out of convenience. Theirs, not mine. I had let her shape the narrative because it was easier than constantly correcting it. But now she dragged that narrative into a public arena. She wanted to parade her version of me in front of a room full of witnesses. And that meant she gave me permission to respond, so I did not with rage, not with volume, just with truth. I passed the bar when I was 24. I continued, eyes still on her. Clerked for a federal judge at 26. Appointed at 32. And yes, Nicole, I still know how to make coffee. In fact, I made it myself this morning while drafting a judgment on a multi-million-dollar securities fraud case. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was cleansing. It was a purge. Nicole's face was flushed crimson. She opened her mouth again, but no words came out. Her fiance stood up and walked toward me. For a moment, I thought he might defend her. Instead, he said something I'll never forget. You're Judge Brittany Lane. I nodded. My firm had a case in front of you last year. We lost. But my boss said your reasoning in the ruling was one of the sharpest he'd seen in decades. Nicole sat frozen. The man she was going to marry had just expressed admiration for the sister she'd spent her whole life mocking. Excuse me, she mumbled, rising suddenly and walking away from the table. Probably to cry. Or scream. Or both. I didn't follow. I just sipped my water and let the moment settle. Some truths are sharp, yes, but they're also freeing. And this one had been a long time coming. After Nicole stormed away, the room tried to resume its rhythm, but it never quite recovered. Conversations resumed in soft murmurs. Clinking silverware filled in the gaps. And somewhere in the back, the violinist stumbled into a melancholy tune that felt more like a soundtrack to a funeral than a celebration. And me? I sat there still. Not triumphant, not smug, just still. I wasn't sure what I expected. Maybe someone from the family to finally say, we're sorry. Maybe a glance of pride from my parents. Maybe my sister would come back, cheeks wet, ready to laugh it off and say, okay, you got me. Guess you're not just the coffee girl after all. But none of that happened. My mother kept looking at her plate like it would offer answers. My father kept tapping his fingers against his glass in a rhythm that betrayed just how rattled he was. They weren't angry at Nicole for humiliating me. They were angry at me for undoing the lie, for not playing along, for making them feel foolish in front of others, even though I had done nothing but speak the truth. For years, they relied on me to play the background music in their perfect family symphony. I wasn't supposed to step forward. I was supposed to harmonize, softly and visibly, but not anymore. Aunt Melody leaned over eventually. You never told us, sweetheart. Her voice was kind. Genuinely surprised, maybe even a little proud. I tried, I said, many times, but everyone laughed when I mentioned law school, remember? She did, her face told me so. But awkward. Thanksgiving where I brought it up, and Nicole joked that I'd never survive without spell check and a dress code. I had smiled and laughed along with everyone, and no one noticed my hands trembling under the table, and that's when I realized something important. This wasn't just about Nicole. It was about a family that had decided who I was before I became anything and never once bothered to update the narrative. The sweet, reliable, forgettable little sister who was always happy to help. The built-in assistant. the permanent cheerleader. The punchline. I excused myself from the table, walked slowly through the maze of guests, and out onto the terrace. It was quiet there, the kind of quiet that lets you hear your heartbeat. I leaned on the railing, watching the city lights flicker below, and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding for years. Then the glass door opened behind me. I didn't need to look. I knew it was Nicole. She didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, breathing too loud. Her heels clicked once on the tile, then stopped. Finally, she spoke. I didn't know. Her voice was small, not apologetic, just stunned. I know, I said. She walked closer, arms folded tight. Why didn't you ever tell me that you were a judge? I turned to face her. Would it have made a difference? She blinked. Maybe. No, it wouldn't have, I said calmly. You decided who I was a long time ago. Anything I became after that just threatened the version of me that made you feel bigger. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. I'm not here to embarrass you, Nicole. I never was. I came to support you. But you brought me into the spotlight. You mocked me again, and I was done letting that pass. We stood there for a long moment, her in her glittering engagement dress, me in a plain navy suit that suddenly looked like armor. Are you mad at me? She finally asked, voice cracking. I thought about that, and I realized something powerful. No, I sighed. I'm not angry. I'm just finished. She flinched like that hurt more than if I'd yelled. I hope you have a beautiful wedding. I really do, I added, but I won't be staying. And I didn't. I walked out of the building, called a cab, and left that night behind me. I didn't need closure. I had something better, self-respect. When I walked back inside, I thought the buzz of conversation would have returned to normal. I thought the laughter would have swallowed what just happened, rewriting it in people's memories as an awkward moment quickly forgotten. But no, the room was still humming with tension. Forks hovered mid-air. Glasses remained untouched. And so many eyes followed me as I calmly returned to my seat, as if I'd become someone else in the last 20 minutes. No one dared speak first. Not even my parents. Nicole hadn't returned to the table. Her seat sat vacant like a placeholder for guilt. But the silence didn't last forever. It broke when someone at the next table whispered, not quietly enough. She said, "Judge?" That word, that one single word dotted echoed through the room like thunder. Federal, I corrected softly, not out of arrogance, but because I was done hiding. I was appointed last year. I didn't say it like a mic drop. I didn't raise my voice or demand attention, but attention came anyway. Whispers turned into murmurs. Heads turned. And then, as if rehearsed, every expression shifted. There was awe in some faces, embarrassment in others. A few were scrambling to pretend they knew it all along, but most of them just looked the caterer who had offered me a paper. Napkin earlier rushed over now with the best linen they had. My cousin, who once laughed when I said I was applying to law school, now leaned in with this forced smile and said, "Wow, you've really made it, huh?" And then came the FIANCE acute Daniel. He walked across the room like he was walking into a courtroom, slow, uncertain, cautious. When he reached me, he extended his hand, not in greeting, but in the careful, deliberate way people do when they know they've missed something important. "I just want to say," he began, "I had no idea who you were. I mean, obviously, I knew you were Brittany, but I didn't know that I wasn't just admin." I offered, looking him in the eye. His ears turned red. Yeah, he looked genuinely embarrassed. And not just because he'd laughed at the joke Nicole made earlier. "I think we may have actually seen each other," he said after a pause. 3 months ago. Johnson and Kravitz case. You were on the bench." I nodded. "Yes, you were the opposing counsel." His face froze. I didn't need to say anything else. That was enough. The realization bloomed in his expression like slow horror. He had stood in my courtroom, argued in front of me. Probably underestimated me then, now. He looked at me as if seeing a stranger who'd been in his house the whole time. Wow. He stepped back. I need to talk to Nicole. And then he walked away, leaving me alone again, but this time not invisible. Not even close. My father cleared his throat, loudly. Brittany, you could have told us. I turned toward him. I did. He looked confused. I told you when I passed the bar. You said I was aiming too high. That it was better to be realistic and safe. He blinked, opening his mouth as if to deny it, then slowly closing it again. My mother chimed. And next, her voice brittle. You've accomplished so much. We're proud of you. I smiled just a little. I didn't do it for your pride. And that was the truth. I hadn't chased law school or passed grueling exams or worked through weekends for their approval. I did it for me. Because I knew what I was capable of, even if they never did. Someone clanked a spoon against a glass, awkwardly trying to restart the toast. The moment had shifted, permanently. People looked at me now not as Brittany the sister, or Brittany the helper, but as Brittany the judge. The balance of power had tilted, and everyone could feel it. I sat back, letting the noise fill the room again, but I was no longer part of it in the same way. I was on the outside now, not excluded, but elevated. And that, oddly enough, felt lonelier than I expected, but it also felt like peace. The days that followed weren't filled with peace or vindication the way I imagined. There was no parade, no ceremony, just the quiet realization that everything had changed and not everyone knew how to react. It started with a post. I hadn't even seen it until it was forwarded to me by a former classmate from law school. Someone had filmed the moment, not the slap of a glass or a dramatic reveal, but the quiet second after I said the word judge, and the entire room collectively stopped breathing. You could see it on their faces. Nicole's frozen smile, Daniel's slow collapse. My parents' stunned silence. The post didn't go viral in the way cat videos or influencer drama did, but it spread fast enough. She said one word, and the whole family realized who they'd ignored. The caption stung, mostly because it was. True, I hadn't meant to make a scene, but apparently the world loves poetic justice, and they especially love when the underestimated one reclaims the room. People commented things like, "This is the kind of power silence holds. The best revenge is success and restraint." Imagine mocking your sister in front of everyone, and then realizing she could legally sentence you. I didn't respond. I didn't repost, but the video was shared, then reshared. And soon I was getting LinkedIn requests from people I didn't know, including attorneys, law students, even advocacy group leaders. My inbox filled with respectful admiration and private messages from distant cousins and former high school classmates who suddenly always believed in me. The irony was sickening, but the message requests that hit the hardest weren't from strangers. They were from my sister. First it was, "Hey, can we talk?" Then, "I didn't mean to hurt you that night. It was just a joke." And later, "You embarrassed the whole family." There it was, the real wound. Not the joke itself, not the disrespect, but the fallout, the exposure. That people outside our little circle now knew the truth. That I wasn't just the helpful little sister who made reservations and sent reminders. I was someone whose absence would echo in ways they never understood until now. My parents didn't say much directly. But I heard through an aunt that they were disappointed I'd let things get so public, that I humiliated the family. Not by anything I said, but by refusing to stay small. Meanwhile, Daniel, well, he canceled the engagement. Apparently, discovering that your future wife delights in publicly humiliating someone out of jealousy, and that the person she mocked could have sentenced you in court changes your perspective. He sent me a message too. "I'm sorry. I should have said something that night. I let her treat you like that and didn't speak up. You didn't deserve that." I didn't reply, not because I was angry, but because I didn't need anything from him. Not validation, not defense, and certainly not regret. The public attention eventually faded. Like everything on mine, it became just another moment in someone else's feed. But the shift in my family was permanent. Nicole didn't come to Thanksgiving that year. Neither did I. My mother left a voicemail asking me to let things go. I deleted it because I finally understood something. Peace doesn't come from keeping the peace. It comes from protecting your space, your identity, your dignity, even if that means walking alone for a while. I hadn't exposed anyone, I had simply spoken the truth, and the truth had done the exposing all on its own. After the dust had settled, but not really, the family began their slow, awkward attempt at damage control. Not accountability, not genuine remorse, just ... reputation maintenance. The kind that comes when you're more upset about how something looks than about what it actually was. It started with a brunch invite from my mother. She called it a casual Sunday family catch-up. No mention of what had happened. No mention of Nicole's public mockery, Dad's stiff silence, or the cold humiliation that had simmered just beneath the roast chicken at that engagement dinner. It was as if they expected me to show up like nothing had happened, as if I were still that girl who brought wine, smiled politely, and quietly helped with dishes while they gossiped about other difficult women. I declined, politely, then blocked the group text. That act alone sent shockwaves. Suddenly, I was being dramatic, burning bridges, and overreacting. Because to them, my silence that night had been acceptable, but my silence after the event, my refusal to perform reconciliation without recognition, that was offensive. Nicole didn't speak to me for over a month. When she finally did, it was through a message that read, "Hope you're happy now. You made everything about you." I hope the attention was worth it. I stared at those words for a long time, because they revealed the core of it. She thought this had been about revenge, about performance, about proving something. But the truth was much simpler and far more painful. This had never been about revenge. This had been about identity. For years, I played the part they handed me. The sister who always made herself small so the room wouldn't feel crowded. The quiet one who knew better than to correct anyone. The one who nodded along while Nicole basked in praise she never earned and endured jokes at her expense. Like it was her job to absorb them. They weren't prepared for me to step out of that role. And when I did, they called it betrayal. But I wasn't betraying anyone. I was just done betraying myself. The final confirmation came during a call with my father. He rarely spoke more than a few words, unless it was about stocks, sports, or politics. But this time, his voice was quiet, guarded. "I'm not saying you were wrong," he began. "But did you have to humiliate your sister like that?" I let out a slow breath. "I didn't humiliate her, Dad. I told the truth." He sighed, like the truth was inconvenient. "Couldn't you have told us before that you were doing so well?" That one landed. Like a cold stone in my stomach, I had. Over the years, I tried to share small victories, milestones, honors. They brushed them off, changed the subject, called me humble in a way that really meant unimportant. They didn't want to see me until the world saw me first. And now that the world had, they couldn't unsee it, couldn't unfeel the shift, couldn't figure out how to put me back in the little box I'd labeled Brittany, nice, quiet, supportive. So I made my own boundary. I told my parents I wouldn't be attending the wedding, that I wished Nicole and Daniel well, but I refused to sit at any table where I was both expected to serve and forbidden to speak. There was silence on the line. Then the quiet clink of a glass. Then, finally, my dad spoke. "Okay." Just that, no argument. No guilt trip. No pleading. Maybe, in his own way, he understood. I wasn't the quiet one anymore. I was just the one who'd stopped pretending. It's strange how silence shifts after confrontation. Before, my quietness was their comfort, the background hum that allowed everyone else to speak louder, be ruder, more self-important without consequence. But after that night, after I said one word and the room stopped breathing, my silence became something else. Not invisible, not passive, but powerful. Dangerous even. I waited for a while for something. Not a speech, not a full confession. Just an acknowledgement. Something real. Nicole didn't call. She didn't text. She didn't show up at my office or write a note or send a meme to break the ice like she used to when we were kids, and she broke something that belonged to me. Back then, she always found a way to make me forgive her without ever saying sorry. But this time, she said nothing. Instead, the message came through Mom, which told me everything I needed to know. A screenshot sent to my email. A forwarded message. It read, "I guess she's happy now. Tell her I hope her job keeps her warm at night." I have a wedding to plan. That was it. No apology. Just bitterness, deflection. A reminder that even now, I was supposed to feel bad for disrupting her moment. But I didn't, because what I learned in the silence that followed was this. I know. Longer needed her to recognize what she did. I just needed to recognize that I didn't deserve it. When I was younger, I thought apologies fixed things. That once someone said, "I'm sorry," it meant everything could go back to how it was before. But I've learned, painfully, slowly, that before is not always something worth returning to. Especially when before meant shrinking myself so someone else could feel big. Didn't need Nicole to apologize for embarrassing me. I needed me to stop making excuses for her dots, so I stopped checking her socials. I stopped asking Mom if she'd mentioned me. I stopped hoping she'd grow into the kind of person who'd reflect, or grow, or even just care. I let the space between us stay empty. Not because I wanted revenge, but because it was the first time I had ever prioritized peace over performance. That peace came in quiet moments. Like the morning I walked into my courtroom and found a handwritten thank you note on the bench from a young woman I'd helped through a particularly brutal trial. Or when one of my former clerks, a girl Nicole once called my charity case friend, made partner and invited me as the guest of honor at her celebration dinner. Or when I walked into a school one Saturday morning to give a talk on justice to a group of teenage girls, and one of them asked, "How did you get brave enough to speak up when no one else believed in you?" I told her the truth. I stopped waiting to be believed. I started believing in myself. It didn't sound like much, but it was everything. I still think about that dinner sometimes, the click of silverware stopping, the way Nicole's laugh cracked, how Daniel's eyes widened like he'd been watching a movie and just realized who the main character was. I think about how, for a moment, the balance of power shifted, not because I raised my voice, but because I didn't need to. I just told the truth and let it land. That was the apology I needed, not from Nicole, but from the universe. A quiet, undeniable moment where all my years of work, all the hours no one saw, all the kindness that was mistaken for weakness, finally spoke for itself. There's a moment that comes after the storm, after the tears dry, the silence settles, and the need to prove yourself fades into something softer. It's not victory. Not entirely. It's something quieter. Something sturdier. Peace, maybe, or something close to it. That's where I live now. After the engagement dinner, after the word judge changed the course of a family evening, I didn't spiral into a fit of fury or retreat into shame. I simply went home, took off the heels I had worn out of courtesy, and made myself a cup of tea. I remember sitting on my couch, the city humming low outside my windows, and thinking, I don't have to keep shrinking so they can feel big. For so long, I'd apologized for simply existing the way I am, for having ambition, for having boundaries, for not playing the role they wrote for me, the role of the helper, the support act, the girl who brings the documents and smiles in the background, the little sister whose achievements were only valid if they didn't threaten the golden child. I played that role for decades, silently, patiently, and I was good at it. Too good, maybe, but that night when I stood in a room full of family and strangers and said one word that broke their carefully constructed illusion, I realized I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to embarrass Nicole. I didn't need to dismantle anyone publicly. I just needed to exist, fully, without permission, without apology. Without shrinking, I stopped showing up for family brunches, where the only thing served was resentment disguised as compliments. I stopped answering texts that began with, "Can you help me with?" and never included a "How are you?" I stopped pretending that being polite meant being complicit. I stopped letting people define me by what I used to be or what they expected me to be. Nicole never tried again. Our parents reached out once, a guilt-laced voicemail, about misunderstandings and regret, and how they didn't realize how much I had grown. But I hadn't grown in secret. I had simply stopped performing. And they hadn't seen it because they never looked beyond what they assumed. Now, my life is mine. My peace is not up for discussion. I go to work, I serve in a courtroom where my words carry weight, not because of a title, but because of years of work that no one in that family ever bothered to ask about. I mentor young women who remind me of the girl I used to be, quiet, capable, overlooked, and I teach them how to take up space without asking for forgiveness. Sometimes people assume that standing up for yourself means burning bridges or being cruel, but it doesn't. Not always. Sometimes it just means walking across the bridge and not looking back. It means accepting that some people will never clap for you and realizing that their silence is not your burden. I never confronted Nicole again. I never needed to. The truth landed exactly where it needed to land, and once it did, there was nothing left to argue. Her reaction, her bitterness, her avoidance was her own confession, one that said more than any apology ever could. Didn't destroy her, I didn't retaliate, I didn't gloat. I just stopped hiding. And that, more than revenge, more than validation, more than any apology, was the most powerful thing I could have done. Because sometimes the most radical thing a woman can do is simply stop apologizing for who she is.